What?
There you go. Can you do the whole thing?
You want to do the presentation for you? You could. I don't know. Let me just hit slide. I'll read your slide. I'll read.
There's not a lot to read.
I'll read it in a sexy voice or something. Oh, there you go. Make it worth it. Okay. You ready? All right, here we go. Ian Amit has over a decade of experience in hands-on and strategic roles, working across a diversity of security fields, business, industry, marketing, technical, and research. At ZeroFox, Ian leads the company's services offerings. Previously, Ian served as Director of Services at IO Active. His career includes time at Security Art, Aladdin, Fijian, and Data Advantage, as well as speaking at conferences such as Black Hat, DEF CON, and Info Security. A skilled researcher, Ian has a deep technical knowledge of programming, operating systems, applications, penetration testing, databases, and infrastructures. He founded the Tel Aviv DEF CON chapter and also was a founding member of the Penetration Testing Execution Standard. Ian studied computer science and business administration at the Interdisciplinary Center and lives in Manhattan. I was going to slaughter that. Thank you.
Thank you. I haven't realized they're actually going to read like the full official company corporate bio. I would have changed it otherwise, but thank you for that. Since that bio was written, I switched companies, and now I do online security for an e-commerce platform. So this is nothing to do, by the way, with my employer, and we'll leave it with that. Now, I can't leave here, right? I have to talk to the microphone. Whew, this is going to be... All right. Let's do it. All right, so let's talk about social media. Oh, this is much better. Let's talk about social media. And why did I even start looking at social media from a security perspective, which kind of sounds quirky, but here's kind of a path through my way of thinking and how I got to this research and why it matters to me. Start with the problem definition. Anyone can spot the problem with these social media accounts? Show of hands. Is that the Richard Branson Facebook, Twitter account? Yay, nay? Sure. Oreos? No. And is that a real account? Does that represent an actual person or not? Myob. Doesn't sound like a popular last name, right? All right, so Myob, for those of you who don't know, I've got a business card, is mind your own business. And his account, it's actually a friend of mine who does not want to be identified as himself on social media, which kind of poses a problem in terms of how do you translate or interpolate the risk that that account might carry with it to a real identity or to a corporation. By the way, that's not Richard Branson's actual Twitter account. If you look at the Twitter handle, there's an extra S. But it talks as if it is Richard Branson. And it has caused in the past a few problems from a PR perspective, from a company perspective, in terms of how that account might represent or misrepresent the actual Richard Branson. Here's a few more. Which one of those is me for real? Well, they all are. They all are. They're just used in different contexts. I just happen to want to have multiple identities online for different uses. So I have multiple accounts on G+ or whatever it is. Basically different Gmail accounts. That they all represent me. I have more accounts that try not to represent me, but again, if you try to understand my activities online and how they reflect on my employer, on me personally from a security perspective, that's going to pose a problem unless you're able to identify all of those. So one day I was, again, working through those kind of problems, and I realized there's no real a risk framework or methodology that enables us to say this activity is riskier than another activity, or that account is riskier than a different account, or that person versus that person, their behavior online is different in terms of how it implies to me as an employer, as a company, so I can take action on those. The biggest motivation for this was the classic phishing problem. It just works. And we've seen a huge shift from traditional email-based phishing towards social media because it just works better. Email is very asynchronous. You kind of send and hope they click it. You have no real interaction. Social media, it's highly interactive. You have a strong sense of implied trust because if you're in my network, first, second, third connection, I can kind of trace back how are you connected to my friends and so on and so forth. And that connectability implies trust as well. So if I pop up on your, let's not talk about LinkedIn, but Facebook or Twitter, and you see that I'm following someone or someone that you trust is following me, you might say, oh, this might be legit. Let's see what he wants. And it's much more interactive. So we've seen a lot of success as an attack vector from a social engineering perspective on email, and that's all shifting to social media. And that was like a big gap for me as a practitioner that kind of spun me towards looking into that problem. Here's a couple of real-world examples of the power of social media and the impact that it can have on a person or on a company. Anyone recognize this young lady? Yes? No? No one? Wow. The internet short-term memory is amazing. This person is called Justine Sacco. Rings a bell? Justine Sacco used to work for for an ad agency or online marketing agency and tweeted this. I don't know if you can see this. Right before she boarded a plane from London to South Africa. Going to Africa, hope I don't get AIDS. Just kidding, I'm white. Which is wrong on different levels, and it's a very kind of complex, sarcastic tweet, but we're not judging here. She boarded the plane right after tweeting this. And before she took off, she had about a couple of hundred followers, just a run-of-the-mill account. Within the 10, 12, 14 hours of that flight, there was a trending hashtag on Twitter. And that hashtag was, has Justine landed yet? Because this thing went viral like crazy. Crazy. Again, internet short-term memory. You all can't remember this, but this was like 6 years ago? I can't remember. And by the time she landed, she had death threats in her inbox, and people were talking about how racist she was and inappropriate. She was fired, basically, on her trip, but she was notified only when she actually landed. And that's why everyone wanted to know, has Justine landed yet? And was following that trend. Someone took her picture in Cape Town after she landed. So to solve the mystery, has Justine landed yet? Her phone literally blew up from the number of, by the time she landed, she had a few million followers. Literally blew up with notifications and messages. Amongst them was basically "you're fired" from her employer. And the impact on her personal life was pretty devastating. She and her family were receiving repeated death threats and I'm going to rape you and give you AIDS and so on and so forth. Horrible. She couldn't get a job for years after this incident because, yes, the internet has short-term memory, and none of you have remembered this. But if you're trying to hire Justine or she's trying to get a job with you, you Google her name and, oh, yeah, that lady. Nope. Not in PR, not in marketing. And the kind of jobs that would offer her a position are the ones that you usually don't want to get. You got all the sleazy kind of companies. Oh, yeah, well, we're going to capitalize on this. So again, one tweet can change your life for a good number of years. There was an article, I think it's in the New Yorker, talking about internet shaming and the impact, where she was featured in, and she actually managed to get a job after a few years, but still very, under heavy therapy and psychological treatment, and had a horrible life for a good chunk of years after this. Another physical example, this is a little more recent. This guy? Oh yeah, all right. Still remember, good. Martin Shkreli. He's a smug little fella. He owns, he's a hedge fund or kind of a money manager or something like that, and he bought a pharmaceutical company where his first action, day one as the CEO, was to spike the price of the biggest selling drug, an AIDS drug, by like 700%. Or, give or take, I can't remember, it's, numbers. And he got what is it? 1,500, numbers. It's something really obscene. Which was his capitalistic way of saying, I bought the company, I own it now, let's capitalize on it. All right, let's see some return on investment. And he was not apologetic about it at all. And with that kind of smug smile, you can kind of understand the kind of relationship and interactions he had with the public, which obviously put him on 4chan's hit list, where they doxed him. And that kind of doxing can go down all the way to physical threats. So yes, ordering 10 trays of pizza to his personal home address is one thing, but someone could have just as well threw a grenade into his window, for example. And yes, by the way, he found out fairly quickly that he had to hire a lot of security people, which he did through interviewing them on YouTube and kind of streaming. So he kind of kept that line. Very interesting. In that case, he just had a lot of money to spend on continuing to be that personality. Again, we're not judging online, but if it was not for the money, obviously he would have a different impact on himself. So you can kind of see the physical ramifications of being an asshole online, of saying something wrong online, and kind of inviting the threats to you. And on a more benign perspective, we just want to help people who are involved in controversial practices. Who here is involved with a controversial line of work? By show of hands. Like controversial industry. Let me help you refine what is controversial industry. Again, show of hands. Financial services? Okay. Makes more sense, right? Healthcare, defense industrial base. These are all controversial in their way because there's going to be someone based on what you do for a living that's not going to like you. And if you express that, if you say that online, you're hurting them. You're hurting their feelings. And they're going to do something about it because it's the internet, and that's what you do on the internet, right? You pick up fights. So understanding this is critical because we're all, at the end of the day, involved with those kind of controversial industries that are going to be attacked because of your personal identity online. You don't have to be part of the company message, but if you tweet about, oh, today I managed to win the company multiple $1 million wins because of a new algorithm that I developed. I'm a big data scientist and I just work for financial services. But in the eyes of someone, you are everything, you represent everything that's wrong with their point of view. And you're going to be a target. You're just inviting more fire. So we decided to come up with a solution, but not a solution in the terms of here's a product, buy it, we'll make money, and it will kind of solve your problem. We wanted to build a solution that would be flexible enough and accurate enough because we understand that this is very subjective. All right? What's wrong for me might not be wrong for you to say online because I'm type A and she is type B, and I work for one company and she works for another, and their biases are completely different. So I can't find a solution to just plug in and cleanse our online security, social media security. So we decided to come up with a framework. And when I say we, I very quickly realized that I need someone to help me with this research and kind of building this framework that has a little more experience on the risk metric side. And I immediately thought of my friend Alex Hutton, who is one of the co-creators of FAIR, Factor Analysis of Information Risk, a framework that I use personally for years now. I was like, hey, Alex, does that make sense to you as well? And I kind of pitched him this idea. And he was like, yes, this is awesome. At the time, he was working for a large financial organization. Now he works for a larger financial organization. He's like, yes, this totally makes sense. Let's figure out a way to solve it. And I gave him what I had. He said, great, you need some more structure. Let's build a framework. And that's what we did. In terms of what we've built, we had very specific goals. First of all, solutions should provide a way to rate people against each other, because we're all ultra competitive and all we want is data to be able to say, that person's online activity is riskier than that person. They both work for the same company in the same department, but now I need to apply something for this person that this person does not need. Okay, because I need a way to rate different people and say risky, riskier, 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 and so on and so forth, and kind of say, these are the guys that I need to focus on. The second thing is I need to be able to drill down to that score and say, what is it? What is that behavior that caused person A to be riskier than person B? I need to find that activity, the root cause of, or the biggest contributor to that score. So it needs to be transparent enough, and again, mathematical enough to say, yes, this is the big chunk that's causing you problems here. I need to be able to track it over time, so it needs to be repetitive and consistent in terms of the score. So if I rate myself twice right now, the score needs to be consistent. If I change a few small things, the score needs to be consistent to the magnitude of those changes and to how they actually affect my risk scoring. And last but not least, it needs to fit in with our OSINT collection and analysis capabilities in the organization. So it needs to support it. It needs to work alongside it, because we're talking about social media. And this is something that every organization should do in terms of how do I look from the outside? How does an attacker view me based on the information that is available for free online? So it needs to kind of have a strong support for OSINT. The next question we had to tackle is how feasible is it? Because I can look at, I can do an analyst work and look at someone's postings online and see how he expresses themselves or she expresses themselves and write a profile and say that person is enticing those kind of threats and groups because of what he said. But I can't scale. I need something scalable, which means it needs to be automatic. And we looked back and we figured, someone actually did something similar in the past. Semantic analysis has gone a long way since it started a couple of decades ago. And someone applied it to the German elections online as it was expressed on Twitter and did the research and actually rated the different candidates in terms of the main characteristics of their speech. So there is a way, we have the technology to be able to analyze an arbitrary body of text and say, these are the characteristics for the person who wrote that text. Is it positive, negative, happy, cheerful, angry, whatever it is? So based on this, I can start working on a score. I mean, when I see numbers, I'm happy. And you're going to hear me say that again. It doesn't have to be completely accurate, and you don't have to agree with that semantic analysis, but it needs to be consistent and repeatable. So if I feed the same body of text with minor changes, with the same meaning, it needs to put out the same score. And it does. So that works for me. So, all right. So we proved that there is something that we can use that can solve part of the problem. And then we get to the more scientific part where we needed to build a framework. So Alex pointed to this guy, Victor Basily, who built a framework for building frameworks. It's called GQ. I know, crazy, right? It's called GQM, Goal Question Metrics. And it basically says, define the goals, all right? Write down exactly what you're trying to achieve. Write questions that will help you understand how to meet that goal. So for every goal, write the questions that are relevant for meeting that goal, and then find the metrics that will help you answer that question. Very structured way of saying, I want to do this. How can I do this? And then the metrics that would support those questions and answer them. A quick example for applying that to patch management. My goals are comprehensiveness, timeliness, and cost effectiveness. If I break it down, the questions I'm trying to answer is, what is the percent of coverage by asset category, percent of coverage by risk for understanding comprehensiveness, and then I'm looking at the actual metrics. I'm not going to bore you with this. You can find it on the actual slides. Timeliness, again, I'm looking at, is the policy, what's the policy for timeliness? What's, is it a week, 2 weeks, 3 days, 5 hours, whatever it is. Priorities for timeliness, and cost effectiveness basically breaks down cost and how much were I reducing the risk by if I patched the server. So that was a quick kind of, here's how it works. This is how it works for us. So we started with, an overarching goal of provide a social media risk scorecard for a person or an organization. Okay, give me a scorecard. These are the questions. Basically focus on the risk elements. How does the online activity of that person or organization increases or affects the likelihood of a threat, the impact of a threat? Am I telling them, am I telling something that might be used to increase the impact of a perceived threat or a potential threat? The areas of impact. And last but not least, what is the unsanctioned presence? Stuff I didn't put online, all right? Fake accounts pretending to be Richard Branson. How do those affect the risk for that person? Which is also interesting because that's something out of my control, but I do need to account for in my security metrics and posture. And then look at the metrics themselves. Long story short, we're both very big quantitative metric guys, but we figured that we're going to have to do some abomination here and mix qualitative and quantitative, and I'll dive into it in a couple of minutes. These are some additional goals that we've had. They're all documented in the actual Excel sheet that provides all the calculations. Sorry, my voice is starting to fade out. I am drugged out of my mind right now because I got cold on my travels in the past 5 days, so excuse me if I fade out by the end. These are some additional goals. I'm not going to bore you with reading them. Read them to yourself. And that's how we got to SMERM, Social Media Risk Metrics. We've got some better candidates for the name, so we're still working on it. Oh, this looks like shit on this projector. This is basically a mind map that breaks down the GQM that I talked about before, all the goals that I've laid out with more specific questions and a lot of different metrics. So when you spread it out, it looks like a big tree with a lot of leaves. Each leaf is basically a metric that I'm measuring. Does that behavior exist or not? So let's walk through some of the main elements of that mind map, all right, to kind of show you what we're measuring here and why we're measuring it. So the first part is the individual risky? Okay, and the first part of that riskiness is, how does their online activity increase the likelihood? All right, how do they motivate a threat? Maybe by talking about hacktivism, all right, and kind of attracting or talking about something controversial and attracting hacktivists to target them. Politics, that's never a controversial topic, right? Especially not now. You'll see some political kind of references in my talk because I started writing it a little less than a year ago, and this thing that's happening here was just in its infancy. I didn't imagine back then where we'd be right now. Religion, again, something that's completely non-controversial, and you know, all of my friends are just completely neutral on Facebook. There's no one talking about religion. And there are no arguments, like heated arguments, and people unfriending people at all, right? You're all the same. Sports, I don't do sports at all, but I've heard some people get kind of crazy when they talk about, and I'm from New York, so we have the whole Mets, Yankees thing. That's why I don't travel to Boston that much, although I have an office there. I think I'm banned. Fraud. The talk before me talked about the many ways that you can conduct fraud or kind of launder money or bitcoins online. I'm sure that the previous presenter is talking about that on social media. What kind of attention does he attract, or I attracted, when I talked about cybercrime back in 2006, when I talked about conducting fraud and kind of dissecting the many ways through which you can launder money and make money online. And of course, the first, what's the count now? Oldest profession in the world, spying. Everyone is interested in what you're doing. And if you are positioned close enough to something interesting, you're going to be a target of some kind of mass surveillance. And I'm not trying to be the news bearer of doomsday, but everyone is going to be tracked about what they say. Some additional elements that we're looking at is how does the online activity changes the way that the threats will express themselves. So is it going to be just cyber attacks because I'm talking about some IT infrastructure, about, oh, we're ditching the blue code servers that like proxies that we have because Symantec bought them and now we're moving to something else. Oh, great. So I have an ODA for that. Thank you very much. Is it going to be physical like we've seen before? Am I talking about, the new locks that we put on the data center? I can't pick them anymore. We just changed to a new vendor and you know what? They're pretty good. I gotta up my game on the tubular, tumbler, locks. Thank you very much. Again, or is it going to be just social? Again, different expressions, different activities online would change the way that the threats manifest themselves, and we're measuring that. We're measuring that through the framework. The type of influence basically is divided with the framework to financial and technical. Financial can express itself in changes in the stock value. All right, or the ability to derail a potential M&A. I've done some forensic work and kind of preventative incident response on an M&A where they actually had to change the terms of it because information leaked or was intentionally leaked by one side of the transaction. So that happens a lot. And that happens for a reason, and there is big money involved, even with change of terms, not only canceling the whole transaction. The last two branches, which I mentioned as the last bullet in terms of the what questions are we asking, basically look at unsanctioned data or unsanctioned information and presence online. And we break it down to a few subcategories. The first one is fake accounts, imposter accounts. Someone is pretending to be me online. What is the impact? What can they do? Okay, depending on my position in the company and the kind of information that I perceive to be accessible to, that can have a big impact, and that needs to be factored in terms of, do we take down that account? How do we handle that? Do we at least know what they're talking about so we can kind of fine-tune our detection to identify if someone is trying to use that information, the fake information? Fun and parody accounts, they're a little trickier. because they're actually legitimate. Twitter will not take down an account that specifically says this is a fun or a parody account on someone. But it still carries some risk posture that we want to enumerate and account for. And last but not least, just data dumps. Someone put their internal database on WikiLeaks, or someone grabbed the mail server and posted it indexed on WikiLeaks. What is the impact of that now? How do I deal with information, my information, out there? I did not publish it. It affects me personally, and it affects me as a corporation, as an organization, because of that information is out there right now. And I'm sure that if you're tracking the news, you can, or logging into WikiLeaks and doing some searches on, some email server, there's a lot of information that keeps coming out of that based on people analyzing it and saying, oh, well, that actually happened or didn't happen, or that was the motivation. So that's how it looks like. Projection here is shitty, but it's a big tree, again, with a lot of leaves at the end. And the way that we're measuring those right now is basically like flip toggles, where every leaf is a behavior. And we're just saying, does that exist or not? We're not even measuring the volume or the extent. Just yes, no. And I'm going to talk about how we dealt with moving from a qualitative approach of yes, no to a quantitative one in a couple of minutes. And that enabled us, again, feeding that through a very sophisticated Excel mechanism to come up with a scorecard that says, these are the different scores for the different elements or questions that we asked before. That is your risk posture. And that's great because that's what we wanted. And then we took a step back and said, well, that's great, but one person works for a super PAC and another person works for a shoe retailer. They both have the same kind of activity. Should they get the same score? Yes? No? Probably not, right? Because those two organizations have different biases. They have different sensitivities. And the way that we solved that bias problem, that sensitivity problem, and also solved the transition from qualitative to quantitative is by providing a built-in bias system. When you start using the metrics framework, the first step is to enter your specific organizational biases. Do you care more about hacktivism or about financial impact? Do you care more about technology or physical threats or social? What matters more to you? PR, technology, marketing, competitive? We gave the three main categories, threat types, vulnerability, and influence, basically a bucket, a big pool of points to play around with and spread between the different categories. And that's how we now have metrics. We have a scalar system that we can apply to the different qualitative elements that we took as our initial metrics. And that's how we, again, moved from qualitative to quantitative. And that's how we ended with the scorecard. Right now, the scorecard, as I mentioned before, focuses on the four main elements: likelihood, manifestation, impact, and a factored number of online threats. For lack of a better name, we kind of aggregated some stuff there. Future work on the scorecard, we'll split it between, I like how it waves, we'll split it between personal and corporate to better reflect the minute differences of a personal account and a corporate account, like an official, Oreo online or Microsoft.com on Facebook. And a few additional elements like factoring in negative sentiment. How does that impact my risk score? Someone talking shit about my company or about me. It's like, Ian's an idiot. He has no idea with risk metrics or social media. And then, ShowMeCon invited him to present here. Don't tweet that. That's a physical threat, by the way. Malicious content. how does my exposure by friending with these, people, I am exposed to malicious stuff because they think it's funny, tweeting, haha, look at that cool website. And you click on it, it's like, oh shit, not again. How does that impact my risk posture? Just based on my friends and friends of friends. And again, I mentioned before, information leaks has some more fine-tuning that needs to be done. So it's on our roadmap for future work in terms of how do we factor that into the overall score. Let's look at how do I actually use this. All right, so I have 10 minutes, so I'm going to flip through this really quickly. The data that I need basically gives me context to what I'm measuring. Okay, so if I'm measuring one person in an organization of 10 people versus 1,000 people, that impact varies. All right, so my sample size is some of the data that I'm looking at. Geography, the scale of data that I'm dealing with. All right, if I found one bad mention of me, in 1 million tweets, I don't care. But if I found 1 in 10 tweets, that's all I have about me online, that goes a long way because that's the first result on a Google page. Like that's the first page, right? 1 in 1 million, it's probably going to get drowned in search results. Chatter, impersonations, I'm counting the number of times that someone is impersonating me, sentiment, and so on and so forth. So a few steps to use this in your organization. First of all, you need to realize how willing is your organization to actually look at online, again, free public data. We're not talking about give me your Facebook credentials. We're talking about Googling stuff. You'd be surprised by the range of willingness from not going to happen, but it's no, not going to happen. We can't do this because legal, HR, whatever it is, all the way down to, oh, we're going to enforce this. You are going to give us some kind of OAuth token, API, whatever it is, to access all of your social media because you work in a very sensitive environment, blah, 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 blah. So identify where you are on that range. Then identify who do you want to track. Your IT guys that have access to sensitive assets, executive management, board members that, again, when influenced or when hacked, can have a huge impact on big decisions for the organization. Marketing and PR, who by definition deal with the outside. And obviously salespeople, who will say anything and connect with anyone. There's a special category for these on LinkedIn, like open networkers. Like, right, you didn't have to state you're a whore. It says lion. It's LinkedIn open networkers. They're on there. They're out there. So you probably want to target those as well. So identify those. Step 3, start collecting. How, where? On the internet. It's not that difficult. If you need a book, you have a book that will tell you how to get data from the internet for free. Again, I said it before, public information. It doesn't need to be private. It doesn't need to be restricted. You can get it online, process it, all right, ETL it, extract, transform, load. So when you start from a one format of information, learn how to break it down into elements that you can feed into a database and then put context to it. All right. So I have links. I have, mentions of accounts. I have the actual data. I have the metadata around it. So I can use that when I'm analyzing the data later on and then store it. Big data. We've solved that problem. Okay. My bag is from RSA. If you walk in RSA, big data is solved. And then run some analysis. 2 approaches here. Both are valid. You're going to need them both. So listen carefully. One is automated, easy, off the shelf. Find something that does the analysis that you need, just like we did with the semantic analysis. It doesn't have to be super accurate. It needs to be repeatable, okay, and persistent. So solve that. Then you'll be left with the 20, 10, 15, whatever % of manual work that you're going to have to do. We call that the Amish handcrafted approach. Start analyzing the data. Like I said before, I look at the data, I look at the profile and the posting, and I come up with a conclusion. drill through that, kind of reverse engineer that decision process, how I came to that conclusion, and start automating it. So you're going to have to use those two approaches and start shifting from the manual, handcrafted, towards the automatic as you go along. Some examples of semantic analysis. Again, this is going to be very subjective. Take a blob of text and feed it through Watson's semantic analysis engines. It is surprisingly interesting. Again, I'm not judging. So I've taken a big blob of text, Donald Trump's announcement that he's running for president. We had a long speech. I was like, great. This is going to be full of sentiment. And it's a big piece of text. I'm sure that Watson can deal with that. And this is what it came up with. Okay. There's 42% emotional tone, 98% anger, 88% negative. And so again, I'm not judging. I'm just saying this is what the machine said. And you can even break it further down and get like a summary. You're social, boisterous, and can be perceived as short-sighted, unconcerned with art, less concerned with artistic. And again, this is based on that one blob of text. And if you try to change the words to a different word that still says the same thing, you'll see that you'll get a consistent result. That was my test of saying, all right, we can use this. Again, it doesn't have to be right. It just needs to be repeatable. Then apply some big data magic. Again, process, correlate, analyze. That has been solved. So you have solutions for that. And you end up with a score. Oh shit, I actually need a demo now. This is what we ended up with. Sorry. So, as long as we have internet in 2 minutes, you will see how that works. Okay. There we go. This is what it looks like at the end. Let's try to... Can you see this? All right. So first tab is obviously our goals. Second tab is what I talked about before, our biases. You just enter the biases based on the number of, this is 50 points you have to spread around here. If you make a mistake, it's going to turn to a different color. This is supposed to be green. Then you have the actual metrics or the data that we've gathered around it, like organization size, what size of how much of the organization is management, so we can identify biases or different weights between management and non-management. The bulk of data, how many tweets, how many pieces of information are out there, so we can get context. So you enter that. And then you look at the formula, everything here on the yellow side, you just need to flip the toggles. You see here 0, 1, 1. Again, we took that example for Donald Trump just because, we wanted to be consistent. And it's fun. He's got lots of data out there, so it's a great example. Again, I'm not judging. I'm just saying everything is fucked, so it doesn't matter. So you flip the toggles all along the way, and you can start seeing the numbers form up, because that's already calculated based on the biases in the previous sheet, and then you get the final score. Okay, and this is the score, again, for a fictitious Donald Trump. You've got likelihood, manifestation, impact, and the factor number of online threats. Again, you don't have to fully agree with it. You just have to be able to measure that and measure someone else and say, all right, now I understand the differences. I probably want to be at 4. Okay, so I need to take that 4.7 to a 4. How do I do that? Go back to the previous sheet and understand what kind of behaviors increased the likelihood into a 4.7. And figure out a way to reduce those activities, either by talking to someone or applying controls. Technical controls, legal controls, HR controls, I don't know. That's why we stuck with a framework rather than with a product, because we wanted to be able to reflect on more than just technicalities, like, put in AV because he's exposed to a lot of malware because Amanda's his friend or something like that. So that's the scorecard. It is available for free online. Trust me, you can click the link. It will be posted on Twitter and Facebook. You can find it both at there's a secret society of information risk analysts. Very secret, very dangerous. Don't walk in there just unannounced. Crazy people. And there is also, apparently, riskmetrics.com was not registered. So guess who got the new domain? Which is kind of funny because I'm not talking about risk metrics in general. It's very specific social media. But if you're in risk metrics and you need that domain, my Twitter account is going to be on the last slide. I accept offers in Bitcoins as well. Quick summary. When you want to start using this, go through the basics first. Okay? First of all, try to understand, do you have a policy in the company that talks about social media? In terms of what are you allowed or not allowed to say? And if you don't have one, maybe you should start thinking about creating one before measuring the risk of social media activity of your employees and then coming up with like, oh, dude, you got to change this. Like, why? You didn't tell me anything before. So start with a policy. Then understand what kind of risk model do you use for managing risk in general in your company. So instead of coming up with this framework and saying, all right, let's shove this up the risk management process, find a way to adapt this. And again, that's why we kept it open as a framework to work with your existing risk framework. You probably have one. I hope you have one. Otherwise, I have no idea what you're doing in terms of your daily risk management and security. And then do a simple baseline. Measure, take a few individuals, a few targets, get a baseline measurement of their risk score. Wait a week, a month, whatever it is that makes you feel comfortable, and take another measurement. And also track what changed. So you can get a good feeling about what kind of behaviors online those different individuals have and how it manifests itself in a score. And then you can start deciding on, you know what, on this scale, I want to be at a 3.5 or a 7 or whatever it is. And that's going to enable you to start expanding that categorization and tracking to other individuals and equip you with better tools to understand what are those activities that contribute to risky behavior and what kind of controls do I have or do I need to create in order to control it. Rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. This is all I have for you. I know I'm the only one standing between you and a good drink in the bar. So if you have any questions, I am it on Twitter. We have a couple of minutes for questions, or are we like overdone? Over. So party or questions? All right, thank you.